Some days, especially when I read texts like this one, I am convinced that Jesus was a sassy gay man. Convinced, because he can lay some shade on thick. Right? And at least I have not encountered any biblical evidence to rule it out. The pompous Pharisee is looking like a real mess of a fool, and the more he counts the stars in his crown, the sillier he looks. I mean, I know I am a sinner in need of God's mercy. I would never make a show of my faith or look down on someone because of their job. I'm not always humble, but I try. God, thank you, I'm not like that awful Pharisee. The thing about parables is right when you go to pin it down and pat yourself for figuring it out, it begins to unravel again. And usually right about that time, you look down and realize it's your own unraveling. But what is unraveling but another word for resurrection? We see someone standing in smug superiority and then stand in superiority of our not being as awful as they are. And completely miss the irony because we've convinced ourselves that arrogance isn't the same as superiority. It's so insidious that it has even seeped into this very translation of the Bible. So, if you want to look at the actual text in front of you, it's going to be wild. We're going to open our bulletins and look at the text. Go to verse 14, if you'd like, if you can open that up, where it says, "This man went down to his home justified rather than the other." That last verse there. Now, I'm going to take us on a little deep dive technical Greek tour. Because over the years, humanity has created a parable within a parable. We're good at things like that. Modern translators have taken on language that could easily give the reader a sense of division or competition with this verse, when the meaning is just the opposite. The Greek word that's translated rather is the preposition par or para, which is not entirely unrelated from our word partner that we're thinking about today. And in this construction, it denotes a genitive or dative meaning. So, genitive, like Genesis, generate, it provides the source of something. And dative adds details to the relationship of something. So where modern translators have created this adversarial rendering that translates this word to mean one is justified rather than the other, what's in the text is actually in stark contrast. In this context and formation, the phrase is actually closer to a meaning that one is justified because of, beside, alongside the other. I had a philosophy teacher in the 8:30 service who verified this is correct. So, she's like, I teach Greek and you got it, so good. The Pharisees' practices of piety and generosity, those aren't the real issue, but the attitude that twists these things into something that separates us from others, that is poisonous. When we rely on or trust our good behavior to set us apart and above others in the world, but especially before God, it inevitably leads to contempt. It deprives love of any oxygen to thrive or grow, because you can't love someone that you don't respect or value. It is a death knell in relationships and shows up as cannibalization within communities. I've seen it play out in congregations where the people would rather destroy themselves, bicker, and get stuck on something that isn't the real issue. I'm looking at you, carpet color. It's the back wall. What color should we paint it? It's always a color issue. Rather than give up the moral high ground. In the past few years, I've been reading more about burnout and rest and community care. It's kind of been in the air we breathe. And these authors help identify the real issues so that it can be addressed, healed. One telltale sign that you are experiencing burnout is that you struggle not to resent others. When you're tired, your vision gets kind of blurry, right? When we're worn down, our perception is skewed. And our sense of self, of God, of others gets warped. So the more that we assert that we're fine, we can fake it till we make it, and we've got a system to ourselves that will keep our heads above water, the more that belief sinks into our bones, and it's harder to tell the difference between survival mechanism and our own superhuman, red, godlike being. Thank God I listen to podcasts and follow the people and profiles that taught me better. If you don't listen to Brené Brown, this is all of that. I am grateful for finding wisdom and relationships that restore me toward life. But sometimes it can be awfully tempting to drift into judging others for doing life differently than the way that I have found meaning. There is no need to dogpile on the Pharisee. History has shown us the damage of painting Jewish people as powerful, rule-obsessed know-it-alls, a villain that it is easy to hate and destroy. But we could just as easily tell this parable as a priest and a politician walk into a temple. What attitudes and assumptions might we make in this scenario? What other phrases roll off of our tongues and dwell in our hearts? Thank God we're not like that other church. You know the one. Thank God I'm not as narrow-minded and rigid in my beliefs and thinking. And the other way that we say this to ourselves begins with the phrase, why don't they? Why don't they get a job? Volunteer more. Give more. Attend in-person worship more often. Pray in a way that I know they're praying, the way I understand prayer. How can they say they care about the poor and then vote the way they do? How can they talk about equity and equality and still order from Amazon? It's me. Because the reality is, I know plenty of good and faithful people who care about the earth and are trying to figure out how to live faithfully and with integrity with a career in oil and gas. We are not one thing. No one is ever quite the villain that we want them to be. Not even ourselves. But thank God, we're not like those people who speak of a God of love and then harshly judge our fellow human beings. We work so hard not to be the thing that we oppose, but then when we lose our grounding, we inevitably become just another version of what might deserve rightful critique. This week I heard someone say that self-righteousness is the most deceptive sin because we commit it in good conscience. Yikes, right? Pastor Nadia Bolz-Weber posted the idea that maybe the opposite of religious fundamentalism isn't strident atheism or liberalism. Maybe the opposite of fundamentalism is humility. Constantly keeping score only means that nobody ever wins. There is no freedom, no joy, no gospel in it. We are not justified one rather than the other. We are set aright with God and the world because of and alongside one another. We are justified not because of how we are perceived or how well we perform or even how well we fix others and their systems, but by God's own mercy. Liberation comes not from mastering the insatiable measuring sticks of our own creation, but merciful release. And that changes the game entirely. The gospel shows a different way. It asks a different question. How might we be a vessel of mercy? Amen.